Okay.
Should be all set.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Narragansett Regional School District School Committee to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
What don't?
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty for all.
and justice for all.
And I would like to just note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded by Templeton Community TV. So thank you once again, TCTV, for taking care of us and hosting us on your platform. And I'm just going to do a listing of who is here. If you just give me 1 second so I can get my list up to date. So for the Narragansett Regional School Committee, we have Mrs. Robichaud, Mrs. Kojal, Mrs. Matson, Mr. Marks, Mrs. Trifolo, and myself, Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Mason will be joining us. He did indicate he'd be a few minutes late, so we'll note his arrival when he joins us. We also have Dr. Kazmant, Superintendent of Schools. We have Kate Calise, the Assistant Superintendent, Anne-Marie Geister, the Business Manager, Susan Varney, our Administrative Assistant. We also have Eric Iben and Lisa Parker. It's like the Brady Bunch here, trying to remember where everyone is, from the NDEA. So welcome everybody, and good evening as we begin our meeting today. Mrs. Geister, I have bills and payrolls on here. I just carried it in case there was anything that we did need to go over. Was there anything for this week?
We didn't put any on.
Okay, so we'll pass over that. We made a decision last week not to do minutes from the week before. We'll capture those at our next regular school committee meeting and go through all the minutes. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to look for public comment. Mrs. Varney, have we received any emails of public comment?
We have not received any this week.
Okay, and I'm just going to go, do we see any? I don't see anything in our chat
Nothing on the
stream.
feed at this point, no.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on the chat stream, and if there's questions that come across that we're able to answer, we will. Otherwise, we'll make note of them, of course, and try to get back to everybody, depending on our time limit this evening, maybe offline. I'll go to the NDEA and ask Mr. Iben and Ms. Parker if you have anything that you'd like to talk about this evening.
The only thing I thought about mentioning, I did watch both of Dr. Cassavant's public forums, and it did, Madam Chair, make me think, could he perhaps do a forum with the school staff? Because they equally have a lot of questions and ideas about different things. I thought it could be helpful for giving them the kind of information that he gave the public as well.
It's a great idea.
Okay, noted. We'll make sure that happens, because that is a wonderful idea, that we make sure we touch all of our constituents and everybody that is associated with the district. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Without further ado, then we'll go straight into our business of this evening, which is our school reopening plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kazavant and Ms. Calise to go through the plan. And this is the outline of what needs to be submitted to the state effective August 10th, which will be Monday. And I know there's some updates to that, so I'll let Dr. Kazavant speak to that. And what I will ask is, let's not forget to get to the school calendar with that, because we do want to vote on that. And I just don't want it to get lost, because I know we've got a lot of information to go over. So without further ado, I turn this over.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think the most important, just getting started, is the commissioner. We had I would call it an impromptu, but we had a commissioner's call today, and to discuss again the myriad of details that are going on. And one of the things that he relayed to us was that he's going to give us an extension for this plan itself. So it was originally the 10th, which is Monday, but so many people had either meetings 2 days later, a day later, that he gave us until Friday, so a week from tomorrow. Now, granted, we want to, take as much time as it needs, but we do certainly want to move forward so that way we can go in whatever direction that we need to go. So that's, I think that's, I just want to make sure I say that in the offset, just because that's important. If people are feeling, a bit stressed, which we are. But anyway, we in terms of when it's supposed to be due. Also, I want to talk about the letter. There's part of the packet is a letter that would go out normally for the beginning of the school year, which every superintendent writes every year. I didn't feel, you will not find in your packet a letter because I didn't feel it was appropriate to write a letter prior to the school committee voting on a plan. Apparently that's raised some concerns in some other districts. So the letter itself is easily written, the framework of it is done, but certainly did not want to write a letter presupposing anything which may or may not have happened in some districts around the state. So just those two, I want to really just call them housekeeping items. And I'm really just going to turn it right over to Kate, and between Kate and I will, we'll piggyback and add value to whatever the conversation is going on.
Sorry about that, my computer wasn't responding. So the Department of Ed asked us to submit a more comprehensive document about our final plan to them, which includes, I'll just briefly go through, it includes an executive summary, the letter the superintendent just spoke about, and then what our plans are for an in-person model, a hybrid model, and a fully remote model. So throughout this document, you'll see our responses to the department's questions in italics. So our executive summary really just talks about our feasibility study, which we did regarding the space that we have in classrooms and what that allows us to do and doesn't allow us to do. In some of the parent forums, Dr. Cassavant has spoken about, some of this is a math problem. We've been given guidelines by the state around what's safe as far as bringing students back and how we need to do that. And in order to determine if we could come back in full capacity or not, we needed to adhere to those guidelines. So I have this document that the principals helped us create. We had several very long working sessions, of course, with all of our admin throughout the district in order to create this plan. And we literally went through every single room in our district to determine what our capacity is. So I want to call your attention first to this column that I've highlighted, which is column I. So this would be the excess or shortage of space we have with full in-person, all students coming back at 3 feet. And the only place that you'll see the number is blue if it's positive, red if it's negative. The only place you'll see that we have some space is kindergarten, but you'll see that all of these numbers down this column are significant shortages of space in order to come back in person with full students. So that is really speaking to the answer to one of our questions on the Department of Ed submission about how do you plan to come back full? And our answer is that we really cannot come back full. And then we have two other columns here, J, which says, what is our excess or shortage of space at half students at 3 feet, and then half students at 6 feet. So if you go over to column K, obviously it's preferable to come back with 6 feet, but we have shortages in every single classroom all the way down to the high school at 6 feet. So that's why we have arrived at our recommendation for coming back with half of our students in a hybrid model at 3 feet using masks. And you'll see that, you know, there are some classes where at 3 feet for 4th grade, there's literally not one extra space. There's a couple extra spaces in some other grades. So that really is what went into our executive summary here, talking about our feasibility study and how we could bring our students back. So that is what this is all about. So then we talked about our in-person model, which is a kind of short statement that in-person is not really possible in Narragansett at this time. And I want to emphasize that this is not strictly a space shortage, it's also a personnel shortage. So the simple example of that is that if you had 26 children in a classroom in 3rd grade, and now you can fit 13 of them in a classroom, even if you have spare classrooms, you now need an extra teacher. So for every grade, every classroom that we split in half, we need an extra teacher. And as everyone knows, we had budget difficulties and needed to actually reduce our staff last year due to budget difficulties. So we would need in excess of 20 teachers, I would say, to even consider coming back in full if we could find the space. In some buildings, we would have the space. The middle school is really the place where we have neither the space nor the teaching staff. So that's the answer to question C. Question D talks about a hybrid model. So again, all of this regular type is what the department is asking us to submit and to include in our information. And then all of the italics are our proposed answers. Do you want to jump in? Do you want me to continue discussing? Good to go. Okay, so we're recommending hybrid model A, and Dr. Cassavant had really talked about this with the forums, the public forums that we have this week. So hybrid model A, we would divide our students into 2 groups or 2 cohorts. We would have cohort A and cohort B. We've asked our tech department, and they've been able to give us lists of families by address, because we want to keep families together and can't just go by last name, because some families are blended and they have different last names. So we divided our students into cohort A and cohort B, using addresses to be sure to keep families together. And what this chart shows you is that in this plan, group A would be in person and group B would be remote on Monday and Tuesday. That flips Thursday and Friday. Thursday and Friday, group B would be in person, group A would be remote. I'm sorry, I can't hear for some reason. Yeah, okay. So group C indicates students, there are special populations of students who, for example, attend a full day special education placement. They might need additional services or additional in-person time. They might be going 3 to 4 days. Group D would be the group of students whose families request that they go full remote regardless of what the district does. And of course, we still have to educate them. So I won't go through you know, all of this. I would say Wednesday in our hybrid A is a time to deep clean. So we will have group A in person Monday, Tuesday. We'll have Wednesday to deep clean, and then Thursday, Friday, a different group comes in, and then we'll have the weekend to clean. It's also a time when teachers would plan, collaborate, do data analysis, see where students are lacking some skills that perhaps they missed in the spring, and do some small group instruction and so forth. So Wednesdays would be fully utilized for those purposes in this plan. One of the difficulties we faced was in addition to 3-foot distancing guidelines with a mask, we also were asked to keep cohorts of kids together. So we're doing our best. We definitely can't accomplish this at elementary school where a student is with a given class for the full day. Middle and high school, it's a little bit more difficult, but we're limiting the number of interactions they have with students outside of their classes. So we will be able to do that deep cleaning in between when each group is in the school. So it limits the exposure of students to who they're with. One of the difficulties we ran into was that we have about up to as many as almost 200 students in a lunch. And so how do we provide lunches to students if we're keeping them in small groups and not having them mingle? So we're working on a plan for that, but at this time we recommend that we have an abbreviated day. Sometimes people refer to it as a half day, but it's not really a half day. It's 5 out of 7 classes in middle and high school and the equivalent time in elementary, and sending students home with a lunch in our initial plan. We have kind of a phase 2, depending on health conditions and other conditions, that is a hybrid B. But we're recommending hybrid A for now. So for example, the group who's in person might have a schedule that looks like this. If you're in elementary school, you might have morning meeting followed by a lengthy, you can see 90-minute ELA block, a 60-minute math block, perhaps a recess, which would be a time for a math break and or snack, some time for social studies, and then dismissal, lunch at home, and then in the afternoon you'd have 1 remote class. So this would be your group A example. And I put the location because I want to be clear that we have full-time school. It's just the location that varies for where that school is taking place. So in this hybrid model that we're proposing, 8:30 to 12:30 would be taking place in person at school, and then the additional time in the day would take place at home, but still with instruction. We have and that's just an example. We have an example for a schedule for the middle and high school. They, of course, follow the same schedule because we share some staff, and we would be able to do 5 out of 7 classes in person at 46 minutes, which is a fair amount of time for those classes. So if it was a Monday and I was in group A and I was in person, I would do A through E. I would transition home with a lunch. I would do some remote learning. And the group that had been remote in the morning will have some remote classes in the afternoon. So every group would be seen every day. I think I'd stop there to see if you have questions. The only plan left really is full remote, and we have a detailed plan for that as well.
Any questions? Or are we all set
Yeah,
so
I
far?
have
or-
one. I have one.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Ms.
I have, you're going to do deep cleaning on Wednesday. Are you also going to do a deep cleaning over the weekend?
Yeah.
So this will come up a little bit later as we talk about some staffing options, but what we're planning on doing is it's some combination thereof. Not during the weekend necessarily, maybe Friday. It may very well mean that anyone who is renting the building, that we may have to stop that practice. Quite frankly, because once we button everything up, once we clean everything up, and we move forward, then we can't have someone, say, coming in on a Saturday or Sunday, for example, and undoing what we've done. So the exact nature of when it will happen, I'm pretty sure it will not happen over the weekend, but it'll when I get to this kind of the staffing piece of this, we're hoping by Friday, obviously Friday afternoon, Friday evening, that kind of piece. But it would probably mean we won't be able to use the building during the weekend.
Thank you.
I have two questions, and I'm going to ask them, but please just defer if you're going to cover it later on. One has to do with attendance, and I think that is a separate section after. And the second one has to do with lunches. How do we provide lunches to the cohort who's not in school, to those who are remote learning? What discussions are happening about that? So I'll put those out there, and as I said, I think you'll discuss them later, but I just want to put them on the table now. And Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes, on Wednesday, when you're doing a deep cleaning, will the teachers be in the building?
Yes.
Sorry, yes, I thought it was on.
So you can deep clean with how many people in the building?
Well, we'll have to do it in phases, obviously. Depending on how we're going to deploy the teachers, depending on how many teachers we have, where they are in the building. Remember, we're going to have to clean every area that kids have been in. So we're working towards a plan in which we can start on one end and move down accordingly. So I don't expect anyone to be in the cafeterias, obviously, because there won't be any children here on a Wednesday. Start in the larger areas, the gym, cafeterias, etc., and move accordingly. And by that time, staff should be either, not in the building or in different locations. So there's plenty of places to clean without people being in them.
Okay.
Bathrooms.
I'm just making sure that the teachers and staff are, also in a safe place when you're cleaning.
Well, just so we are clear, anything that we would use in a building has to be safe. So granted, we're not going to, spray people or anything to that effect, but anything that we are going to use in the building, it has to be safe enough, in fact, to be used while people are in the building. I just want to again, some of this is, I realize it's common sense, but I understand the point. You certainly don't want to miss the room while people are in it. I absolutely agree with that.
And you also don't want to
I
have
explicitly,
staff touching.
Right. You don't want to contaminate it. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
that's right. I explicitly asked our facilities director if a classroom is misted, how quickly could that teacher return to their room, and it's safe pretty much right away for them to return to their classroom. So each classroom being misted only takes, 10, 15-ish minutes out of the day. So as Dr. Cassavant said, we could rotate.
Mrs. Mattson?
When you were talking about space and who could potentially be in the schools, you mentioned that kindergartners were the only ones that actually had the space to stay in school. So I'm wondering if you thought about having kindergarten students as the only class as all day in person.
Sorry. I think where we landed on that was that it was preferable to have kindergarten students 6 feet apart and be able to have more mask breaks because of their age, fitting them into the classroom. So we have the space to do 6 feet with kindergarten. We don't have the space to do 6 feet with anyone else.
And I would imagine that might also impact the cohort if there's families with kindergartners and other grade levels. There
Right.
are implications with that. And of course, busing could also be another linchpin with making that work. But that's certainly a good question. Thank you, Mrs. Mattson. Mrs. Kojal?
Are we bringing pre-K, the preschoolers back?
Yes. I'm not, again, this was a point of conversation on Tuesday. I really did refer all those questions down to Ms. Saltese, to be very candid. But I know that they are planning to do pre-K, although it seems to be that they're going to provide services for those students whom are required services. So any child with special needs for that, in that category. So the answer is yes, but it won't be as open as normal pre-K would normally be.
Okay.
Any other questions from the committee before we move on? Okay, seeing none, we'll sorry, I keep hitting my.
So
Right, we'll move on with the plan. Sorry about that.
sure. So in the plan in the remote learning model, they asked us to address, oh, I'm not sharing, sorry. Like, there we go. Come on. They asked us to address several things in this plan that will answer some of your questions, Mrs. Hughes. They asked us regarding, high need students and attendance, participation, and how we're grading and all of that. So in all of our models, all three models, in fact, students will be assessed at minimum at the beginning, middle, and end of year using STAR Reading and STAR Math, so we can determine their placement as far as where their skills are when they return to school. K through 8 had done STAR somewhere around February before we left early March. So when we do that at the beginning of the year for K to 8, we'll have some ability to kind of look logistically at these students and where they may have fallen off because of going out of school due to COVID. We added 9 through 12 this year for STAR assessments, so it'll be new for them. So at minimum, we'll do beginning, middle, and end of year for reading and math. This will inform instruction in every area of the curriculum, because whether you're in history or other subjects, your reading, and in many subjects, your math performance also is a factor. So we'll use that data to guide instruction. We also have, through Renaissance, we have STAR Custom, and STAR Custom enables teachers to create specific assessments based on standards or skills, so we can monitor progress. So if we have some time built into our schedules, I said if, but that's not correct. We do have time built into our schedules to address students who might need some targeted support, and we can use the data from these assessments to develop those targeted supports, and then we can use STAR Reading, STAR Custom to monitor progress. In addition to that, of course, we're going to have regular assessments that we normally would always have, teacher-made assessments, program materials, and so forth. So grading and assessment is going to be very similar to what it always has been prior to COVID. When we went out into remote learning, the state advised us to use credit, no credit for our students. That is not the case anymore. So students will go back to what they're used to, which is you have a class, you're responsible for some work, you might have to submit an essay and so forth, and teachers will be grading all of the normal things that they would normally grade in addition to assessments. That's one area. Curriculum, standards, and MCAS, whether students are learning remotely or in person, they're going to have grade level instruction using the full Massachusetts curriculum frameworks. We are advised that we're not going to have kind of power standards or specific standards to focus on, that we're going to be focusing on all of them. So that's what our plan is. And also that at this time, the state is saying that there will be MCAS in the spring of 2021. We're going to use report cards in the same way that we've used them in the past. And it says in the same schedule, we've adjusted the dates to the new 170 days as opposed to 180. And that brings up calendar, by the way, because that's also on our calendar, so we can address that then. Attendance has to be taken whether you're remote or in person. So in person, we're going to take attendance the way we normally would. We're looking into how to most efficiently take attendance for remote learning, and We have, I'm not the tech person, so I'm going to explain this the best I can, but we have what amounts to a gateway into our learning apps, and that gateway is called Clever. So when a student signs on to a district-issued Chromebook, which all students will have, they would log in using their NRSD login, and by doing that, they access all of their virtual learning through this Clever app. So you open up Clever and it has your Into Reading, icon. It has your Footsteps to Brilliance icon. It has all of your different icons, and that Clever can keep a record of your participation in those things. So that's something that we're going to look at leveraging for the remote learning for the attendance piece. If that doesn't work, we'll come up with another option. Obviously, remote learning applies to students who are in isolation or quarantine. We have a schedule if we're in full remote learning, what that might look like, which is very defined. It's not as open-ended as it was in the spring, and we had to be more open-ended in the spring for other reasons. But so every level you can see here, there's an elementary schedule, middle school, high school schedule. It builds in teachers' contractual time, their lunches, their preps, and so forth. There was a question here, are we going to provide before after school due to staffing and space constraints? We're not doing that, but that's optional. And then there's an entire section about student supports and professional learning. So we have a description here of a plan that we're going to implement on the 10 days leading up to school, where teachers have flexibility in attaining some of the training that they personally need, for example, in Screencastify or Google Classroom and so forth. But then we're also going to, as a district, have kind of lessons or training for all students who enter the building on safety. And that would be a district-wide, so everyone has the same message around how to properly wash your hands, how to social distance, how are we traveling in the hallways, what is the proper way to wear a mask, what's the proper way to take a mask off. I'm not using my lockers, so in the middle and high, so what's the correct way to keep my backpack, in my own personal space, so I'm not, tripping anybody up. And so all of those things will have guidance, and those lessons will be adapted based on your level. So obviously a hand washing lesson at first grade is going to, maybe be different than it would be at high school, but we want to have consistency there. So there will be a combination of lessons around safety, time for teachers to plan and adapt curriculum due to these new ways of delivering, training around technology and areas that teachers need some training in technology. Also some, we'll have discussions about social emotional learning and how are we welcoming students back to school while maintaining social distance, but also developing rapport and so forth. So there's quite a lot of information in this section. And then lastly, it just asks us to certify that we meet the final health and safety requirements issued by the department. I know I said a lot of stuff fast.
Okay, I did just want to look at our chat feed and bring up, because we haven't addressed it, but I know we've looked at it, but let's talk about it. It was a question about the HVAC, because I know that most districts are talking about it, looking at ventilation. I believe we've done that. So if we could get an update on what our ventilation looks like and what we found when we looked at that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not going to even try to get into the specifics. I'm not an HVAC guy, but what I know is that the elementary school has the capability, the correct capability of mixing airs, right? So they can take in X percentage of outside air, and it's exactly the kind of ventilation system that you would want in a building. And again, It's filtered, it can be adjusted in terms of intake. And so I don't want to go too far into it because I don't have that. There's a report on that, and I just don't want to overspeak or underspeak to that extent. The other part, though, is should be happy, and we're fortunate that we have an older building. The way that we do our heater units that are in every building, they draw from fresh air, which from the outside, if you look at any one of our heater in the classrooms, and if you look on the outside of the wall, if you could, there's a ventilation, there are vents, there are filters that need to be replaced. They've all been replaced. There are certain filters that folks are looking to put into the buildings, etc. But the good news is that we can draw in fresh air. In those circumstances, and I know that folks have read this and really have perseverated on this topic, is that, you know, at worst, you could just literally open windows, which, you know, draws a bit of ire when you start talking about February in New England. But the simple fact of the matter is that we have the ability to add fresh air and to, you know, I don't think any of us would keep the windows open in February, but if in fact folks were worried about ventilation, we have that ability. Plus the unit vents, again, draw from outside air. When we look at what folks need or want in their buildings, we are not completely contained, or the one ventilation system we do have is very high tech, and it can be adjusted accordingly. That's good news. And of course, in our older buildings, we're drawing fresh air from outside, which a lot of older, by the way, we didn't corner the market on this, but we in fact, like a lot of older buildings, that's where we draw the fresh air from. And then there's the old windows, because going back to buses, because that's where a lot of folks will go immediately and say, well, how are you going to ventilate buses? Well, they're going to open the windows. I go back to February. I understand. But ultimately, if you are looking for airflow, that's what you would need to do on a bus, because buses do not have the type of ventilation, air exchange, for lack of a better word, that buildings have. So I don't know that it answers your question. I know that the guidelines that have come from both the state and the information request that's come from the MTA, those items have been listed. And I'm not sure if that answers your entire question. I don't know how much, per unit and all of that. I just don't have that information. I wouldn't even dare speak to it. But I think we're in pretty good shape when it comes to that. From that aspect.
Thank you. That does answer my question, I think. And if anyone does want additional information and specifics, I would just tell them to contact the superintendent's office, and we'll connect them with the right data and information. But I think it's, we haven't talked about it. It is one of the things that I know that's been out there on social media and different places. So, know that we have looked at it, and it seems that our systems are capable of providing the correct ventilation to ensure that we don't have any risk in the building from the ventilation specifically. So thank you. And that question, just because I didn't say it, was Jennifer Smith on our chat feed. There was one other question, and I don't really think we can answer it right here. Mrs. Smith also wanted to know the maximum number of students in a classroom, and she does say she realizes it will vary from room to room. I know we have the data. So if anyone wants specifics on any of that, I would again refer them to the superintendent's office with specific questions if you have on that, because we could spend probably the next 30 minutes looking at each and every single room. And I don't think it's a good use of our time here tonight, but it is a valid question. So if anyone has the need for the information, please reach out to the superintendent's office, and we can connect you with all of that data.
Madam Chair, the report that we just we had up in the very beginning, we will post that. I mean, I thought it was already posted on the COVID page on the NRSD website, but we have every single room in terms of max at 3 feet and max at 6 feet. So that's the report that we just talked about. So we can certainly put that up.
Great, thank you. And of course, just to qualify that, just because there is a maximum number on a room, based upon enrollment, we might not have that many kids in a room, depending on the mix of kids and the cohort, of course. So,
That's right.
but that'll
right.
give the maximum number, which is what I think people are looking for. So that'd be great if we can get that posted. Thank you. All right. So what questions do we have from the committee? There was a lot of information to digest. I'm just going to start only because I initially asked the question on attendance. So are we going to require then that a student, obviously if they're in person, they get seen, so we have an attendance. Are we going to require that a student logs in any day that they're not in an in-person situation so that we have record of them accessing the systems and doing whatever it is that they're assigned to do in that particular day?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. The state is very adamant about a lot of things, but two of them are, if you're sick, stay home. People have said that plenty of times, but also that attendance counts. Attendance counts. So if you are on a virtual, you're in a virtual session, or you need to be present for that, or you need to log in. If we're working through Google Classroom, for example, those are the type of things that we can track attendance on, for example. So the answer is yes, attendance is mandatory. And I want to kind of branch off from attendance for a second. I said this, I hope, on both parent meetings. Some of the concerns that we received is that when during last year, kids were working, for lack of a better word. They were at multiple places where teenagers work, and it would be what you would consider a typical school day hours. And so again, there was the complaints or the concerns were kind of few and far between, but I know that we also among some other districts have already contacted, I would say, the primary source of employment for our teenagers, to let them know that if someone is 14 years old and it's a Tuesday, they better not be working the 11 to 3 shift, something to that effect. I mean, I'm just making that up, but that's important, because I'm going to get to some things where when we start talking about staffing that may or may not, they might generate more questions, but to kind of talk about truancy and how we need folks to be not folks, but also kids need to be, they're in school. If they're full remote, if we're all full remote, whatever the case may be, they're to be doing their schoolwork, they're to be logged in, they're to be engaged, they're not to be working, for example. So I want to make sure that I say that I kind of, in terms of attendance, I didn't want to branch out into truancy for that, but it's important to state that, and we have and will be reaching out to all of the common areas in which our teenagers do in fact work. I'll wait for questions.
It's a perfect segue, so I think it was appropriate at that point to bring that up, because I know I listened into the morning session and you did discuss it there. I don't know in the afternoon, but I think it's important to know, because when we first went out, it was a different situation, but we are back in school, period. So thank you for clarifying that. So, what other questions does the committee have for Dr. Casavan and Ms. Calise at this point, based on the information that has been?
You did ask about lunch, Ms. Hughes. Did you want me to address that now?
Perfect. That would be awesome. Thank you.
So as everyone knows and can imagine, transportation just in general is the bane of everyone's existence. It really is a difficult conversation, discussion. It really is. But with that said, when we last year, we delivered many of our lunches utilizing the buses that we're paying for anyway. We certainly know at this point that we're not going to have that same opportunity, because we have runs during the day, and to utilize buses which in essence would cost us another run. So with that, we're trying to figure out delivery, because You don't necessarily want to draw them to the schools necessarily, traffic, because lunchtime is lunchtime. And so if people are leaving for lunch, in other words, are leaving, and then you've got folks coming in, it's just going to be a mess, for lack of a better word. So, and also there's reimbursement issues, and and the state is working on this issue of lunch. Again, that's the other real tough nut to crack in terms of how do you, when you normally have 250 kids in a cafeteria, how do you feed them? Because you can't have that many students. No one has a room that large, well, at least that I know of anyway, to fit 250 kids 6 feet apart, so they don't have to wear masks. It's not that we're not thinking about it. We may have to take some time to see how lunch works, period, just to see how we do that, and then to see if we can expand it to all students. I don't know that we have that figured out. We don't know if we can put lunches on the regular runs and have them dropped off somehow, meaning on the typical runs that go home. Where would we drop them off? Who would pick them up? I mean, so we are working through a host of issues on this, but right now we're just trying to get lunch for the kids who are here, right? Just to figure that piece out, and we want to branch. Of course, we want to branch out to offer more opportunities. We think we've got some ideas, but we have to see if they'll fly, quite frankly.
Great, thank you. We look forward to hearing more on that as we can make the plans and hopefully get some guidance from the state too, if they are offering any assistance. So.
The issue, or one of the things that's come up is, can we just make the entire state eligible for free and reduced lunch, right? So that's something that's being either discussed or bantered about, which would help out with some, well, at least in terms of the on the back end of things, but the delivery of it is something we're trying to figure that out as well.
Any questions from the committee?
Yeah, actually, Margaret, I have a question. Chris, just I'm trying to wrap my head around. So for students that are receiving the majority of the daily instructions through special education, Chris, how are we going to provide services such as therapies and one-on-ones? How is that going to work? Well, what's that going to look like?
Sorry, that cohort C that we show and talk about. A lot of questions came up in the parent forums about how are, if my child's on an IEP has services, how do we avail our child to those services? So every child is okay. If we take away just for a second, just for this conversation right now about kids who are full remote, just for a minute. So every child will be, who's in the cohort, who's coming through the hybrid, will be assigned a cohort, whether it be A or B. And those students, depending on need, depending on the IEP, depending on services, the type of services, et cetera, they may do multiple days. So let me just use cohort A as an example. Little Chris Cassavant's here Monday and Tuesday because I'm cohort A. And pardon me. And for whatever reason, whatever service is needed, I might come Thursday. All right. So there's no set, there's not like just kind of a cookie cutter way, because again, it's individualized. Those offerings will still be offered to those folks who are full remote too. So I just want to make sure I hop back into the conversation about all the cohorts, and as we like to do, we like to give them names. So cohort D, and we would probably assign them. We'd have to look. So we don't know right now who's in what cohort, right? Because we want to see. We need to know what the plan is. But we'll have to juggle, of course, space and time, what the individual needs are, what the services are, where our providers are best suited. Some services can be delivered via virtually. Some parents want them to be delivered virtually. Others can't be delivered virtually. So there's a lot of moving parts. But the special education department is we'll be rolling out more information. I know that the CPAC meeting is, oh gosh, I'm not sure if it already happened or is it next week? I forget, honestly. What's that coming up? So a lot of these a lot of those questions will be answered, but we are poised to then start putting people in cohorts once we find out what parents declare ultimately.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Marks?
It does, Margaret, thank you. And Chris, you don't have to answer this because I know it's with everything else. Are we prepared? Do we have the time to do this? I mean, before we return to school, it's similar to what we've been asking with everything. It's just going to be very challenging to get all this done and all the parents updated and all that before we return.
The answer is, well, we gotta. When
Good answer, Chris.
Yeah, I know, but given that there's the 10 days that was negotiated between the state and the MTA and the other various unions, that gives us, what I mean by it gives us days. That's all I'm simply saying is it gives us days, right? Because we were going to start in August when, before all of this, and when we thought about, pre-COVID, and I'll get into the calendar, right? I'll get to that in a bit, but the first day of school is we would present to you would be the 14th of September. And we can go into that in specifics. We'll bring up the calendar, we'll show everybody, but that gives us more time to do that. Pardon me. In a typical year, quite frankly, if a child was a 6th grader or a 7th grader, they would know who their special education teacher is. They would know what team who their teachers are, but it does take a while. By a while, usually by the first week or so, all the scheduling is being done, right? Okay, you'll have speech on Tuesdays, here and here at this time block. That's what those first couple of weeks in school on a normal school year are for. So I think that the bigger piece is how quickly this will make or break everything. How quickly can we get the information to us about is your child going to be, in the hybrid, or, if we go with hybrid A, is it going to be in hybrid, or are they going to be full remote? Okay, so the quicker we receive that information, we can start doing the type of work that, we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks.
Okay. Are we good, Mr. Marks, or did you have anything else?
Nope, I'm good, Margaret, thank you.
Okay, good. And actually, talking about cohorts, there is another question on the chat feed that I'm just going to bring up. I don't think we have an answer, and I don't want to answer for anyone, but I'll put it out there. Mr. Richard had asked, on top of the household members that we're going to try and put in cohorts together, if there's extended family that may come into play, cousins, etc., is there a way that maybe we could capture that information and try to take that into account? And again, my initial thought is, we can ask for any information. I don't know how much we'll be able to accommodate, but I don't know if you've had thoughts about how we're going to ask for this data that maybe we can talk to right now.
It came up actually in our questions about it, primarily around daycares, my son and their cousin, they go to the same place after school. There was a lot of personal kind of situations. How we're going to address that is, at first we have to take care of the cohorts in terms of family household members. We have, again, remember, this is across all grade levels. So the Smiths, that's a tough name to use, but the Smiths, if they have a kindergartner, a 5th grader, and a senior, we have to make sure that they're all in cohort A, for example. So we have to take care of that first, and then if possible, we'll, I don't want to say entertain, but we'll look at these other variables. Although they may be too, right off the bat, they may be too, they just might be too various to make happen. But we're certainly willing to work at it. We just have to take care of the family. When I say family, the household cohorts first, and then move from there.
Great, thank you. I did just want to note for the record that Mr. Mason has joined us. I believe it was at 5:50 is the time I had, or somewhere right around there. So I wanted to make that for the record. Other questions? I had one other question, just because I happened to see it out trolling Twitter today in other districts. Actually was on the listserv for MASC talking about tents. That many districts are getting tents. Some of the towns, especially in city districts, and the districts themselves are getting tents to utilize outside. As students come in, it's a place for them to stop. check in or whatever, get their stuff together before they walk in. Have we looked at that? I think it was briefly mentioned, but I want to put it out there just so we can address it.
So the answer I gave, and I remember it well, tents are a great idea. These are the type of tents, of course, what we're talking about are, I think they call them facility tents. They're the, you'd use for like a wedding. I mean, they have to be, there's, as you can imagine, there are requirements about tents and capacities and dare I say OSHA and those type of things. So looking into that again, it's interesting. It only matters when, of course, something happens that you find out that there are OSHA regulations about tents and or capacity issues. I think that we certainly have talked about tents. We've talked about tents, not necessarily, although I like that idea about, where could they kind of check in. We were talking about tents in terms of where would they possibly have specials. Because if we have to use all of our larger spaces, if we go to where we talked about hybrid B, and we have everybody there for lunch, in order to do lunches, we'd have to do the gyms, we'd have to do both cafeterias, we would have to literally make the gyms, plural, cafeterias, round table, or we'd have to buy tables, we'd have to do things like that in order at those 3 and 6 foot, the 3 foot capacities, 6 foot capacities. Tents in our mind were more for, okay, if band needed to happen, because again, any of the band, the advisories that came out with band, they gave a lot of great ideas, but none of them can be done inside, which, so the singing and the band, if you're going to do band or you're going to sing, you have to do it outside. That's what they said. So in order to do that, it's fine if it's a beautiful September day, not so much if it's a rainy November day. I know that some are thinking about classrooms. I don't personally believe that that is a viable solution in terms of classrooms. One, yes, you could probably fit you could fit a lot of kids underneath there, but you're talking about instruction and what does that look like? We're thinking about tents, we're thinking about mask breaks, because if you can spread out, you can take your masks off. And whatever we do, we're going to certainly put as many mask breaks in, safely as possible. So long story short, I think there's a lot more to tents, and I love the idea, and certainly with the grant monies that have been afforded or we hope that are coming, we can certainly look to do something like that. I think it would have to be very specific though, and we'd have to look into, of course, all the things, the trials and tribulations of tents.
And I have an aversion to camping, so I don't even like the sound of tents, but I had one other question. Actually, it's 2 questions on the full remote school. If we're forced to go to a full remote, in the first paragraph under full remote school, it says that, we anticipate the remote learning model will only be employed in the event of an urgent public health crisis. Perfect. We do not intend to expose high need students to this risk by providing in-person instruction. I'm just questioning, could there be a case where we still might provide some in-person instruction with this particular model? Or are we categorizing this as it is so severe, we really don't want people coming out of their homes, never mind coming into the building?
Can you point me to where you're looking? I'm sorry, I can't locate it.
It's under it's after attendance and then remote learning for students in isolation or quarantine. And
Oh, I got it. Okay.
Got it? Okay. Oh, page 7. I could have just moved my thumb and seen the page. Page 7.
And I'm sorry, what paragraph are you looking at?
It's right under full remote school. It's about halfway in.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And as I said, I'm really just curious.
Okay, I got it.
If I would hope that we're going to evaluate all of the steps, every time that we need to make an adjustment. And I just wanted to qualify if, you said that this is an urgent public crisis, and that's defined as, everybody's really pretty much given the stay-at-home order once again.
Right. So for this section, I relied heavily on our new pupil services director, Matt Holloway, who has been excellent in helping us to develop these plans. We've had conversations around this. There are different schools of thought on whether high need students or certain populations do need in-person instruction. And he feels pretty strongly that if the health considerations are such that we really need to be in remote learning, that we shouldn't be exposing any children to additional health risks.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And then my second question on the remote learning plan, just underneath that, we're looking at the elementary day. And I see, we have morning meeting and English language arts. I guess this is, really a sample schedule, and I have lost my pages because I'm out of order. But my question was, I didn't see art or gym, in this mix. When we look to if we have to go to this full remote model, how are we going to look at, and again, and if we haven't been able to fully vet it, I'm okay with that too, right at this moment. How are we going to accommodate some of these, UA type of classes, gym, art, music, those types of things within this full remote model?
Sure. So in the middle high school, it's pretty easy to say because they would be rotated in with the blocks. In the elementary, we'll have to have some additional discussion about that. The attempt really here was to try to target the core subjects as much as possible. It wasn't really intentional to leave off the related arts, and so I would have to look at that a little more carefully.
Okay.
That's been a topic of conversation, I can say, in my circles, especially with the all the research and work that's been done on screen time. So it might be, especially for younger students, all of us for that matter, but not that we were talking about leaving them out, but we may have to rotate them a lot differently because we know what the core is. And what does that mean in terms of unified arts? It might look a little bit different because, again, you could see a day where you could see, not that we would try to do this, but 6 or 7 hours on a, in front of a screen is just, it's just untenable, undoable. So we have to really kind of think about that, but how we'd have to rotate them in. So let me just say a couple things about the kind of the planning of all this. So one of the things that we know, and I referred to the guidance that the state put out in regards to what is the threshold for, a lot of the questions that we received on Tuesday was, when will you close a building or a school? What happens if a student gets sick? When is there's all these different scenarios, and it's certainly up on our website now. But the guidance that the CDC put out, and of course the state took as its own, and we are going to personalize it, meaning make sure that it fits what we're talking about. But those scenarios are there. But one of the things about is that you need potentially, without warning, staff, right? So what we know is that substitutes are substitute teachers are hard to find, or they're easy to find depending on a lot of things, but it's intermittent at best. One of the things that the commissioner and the state has done is they said, look, you can have long-term subs for the entire year, because normally if you were to hire a long-term sub, you need to find a certified, in that specific area within, I believe it's 6 weeks. I forgot the time frame, but what they've done, 6 more than that, but they've allowed us this, this idea that you can have a long-term sub, and they recommended highly that you have them on hand because you don't know what just day to day. And so then I know that we talked about deep cleaning. Like, how will you deep clean on a Friday? How do you deep clean anything when you only have X amount of people? And what was also talked about is that every child is going to have a Chromebook in this district. We are now a one-to-one district, thanks to Mike and his crew. But as you can imagine, that's roughly 1,400 folks out there or kids out there with a Chromebook, and how do you support those things? So that became concerning when you don't know what you'll need day to day. So what I did is the CARES monies that have come into the towns, into the municipalities, as we know, that they gave municipalities a very short window to spend the money. Matter of fact, it all has to be spent, at least this round, by December 31st. Much of those monies have yet to be expended because people could not spend them quick enough, because there's a lot of they want to make sure that the money that's being spent is really closing the gap between how does things work normally, and now we're in the midst of trying to educate during COVID. So I reached out to the town of Templeton and said, these are the kind of things I'm concerned about, and would there be an opportunity just to discuss if those monies from FEMA, MEMA, but the CARES monies, would they be eligible? And in the hopes that, of course, that the monies are there, but in terms of the time to spend it. So Anne Marie and I sat down with Chief Bennett, and Adam Carter and Rich Curtis, who runs the FEMA MEMA, and said, look, and we talked about some of our, these needs that we may have. And again, we're not talking about teachers, because that's a whole other conversation, which we will get into, but we talked about the need and said, look, do we think that these positions, and so I'm going to tell you, a tech support person, and by the way, these are not permanent positions to be here forever. So let me just say they are temporary positions that would be funded through the CARES grant through the municipalities, all right? But a tech person, 3 janitorial staff, because when you start getting into the fact that you have to now deep clean, really, because we talked about deep cleaning on Wednesday, Friday is also another day, right? Or Monday morning, either one. It could 6 one, half dozen the other, but you are going to be switching cohorts, and although 48 hours is an acceptable amount of time, but you still don't want to just leave it up to chance. So you're going to need to, and by the way, custodial staff can be sick as well. And so you have to somehow figure out how to work around that. And so a tech support person, 3 janitorial staff members, and 3 long-term subs. Again, let me just say, temporary through the CARES grants for the municipality. I want to make sure I keep saying that over and over again. And in the addition of an additional, just a 20-hour school resource officer. One of the things that comes up that that we haven't had a chance to talk a lot about is that during last year there were some significant mental health issues that needed to be taken care of, but there was really not a lot of folks around to take care of them, meaning because they weren't in school, right? So the support network wasn't readily available. We have we have a lot of different programmings that we are trying to. We have our mental health workers that we have here in the district, et cetera. But we feel that, in terms of truancy and working with Handle with Care and our ACEs program and all of those type of things, that would be also another area of need. And so when we discussed this, Rich Curtis listened. He asked a lot of deep questions, but ultimately would be around $180,000 that would be applied to this grant, to the CARES grant. And received an email just very recently saying that every one of our submissions seems to meet the criteria. So there's a very good chance, again, until it's done, you don't know, right? But they feel that it's secure enough where some of these positions actually could be posted, because they feel that confident when they went through whom they go through on that end. So what I'm leading up to, of course, is that there's this schedule, right? There's the idea that we can only really educate in a hybrid model. We know that we need to be prepared to go full remote if that time should happen. But during all of this, that business can go on and has to go on. We're going to have to do all the things that we do in a normal, on a normal school day, but it's going to require potentially more folks to do it, given the fact that we may have folks, who may not be able to work at any given time. So we felt that that was the best use of monies, meaning that it's the CARES monies that you have to apply for, and it has to meet a certain criteria. We think that it's, when I say we, Rich, Curtis, and Carter, etc., feel that that we've hit on some pretty good ideas, and it hits the it hits the note that needs to be hit in terms of monies. I'll stop right there because I'm sure there's some questions, but I wanted to just make sure that we talked about that. We could talk about teaching staff here in a sec, but.
So those monies that would become available, though, that would only be up through December for spending, because that's the time frame for the grant. So it would cover us for the first several months.
Yes, and what we're hoping, because if you watch the news, there's billions of dollars that have been unexpended because no one's had the time to spend it. And the paperwork to do that has been fairly lengthy. So the hope is that those monies will be extending. They'll not give us more money, but they'll extend the time in which you may spend that money. So even if we have them only till December, especially when we start talking about cleaning staff, etc., that we think that that's a good investment, and the monies again are available. And if we meet the criteria, then that'll be a positive thing. And we want to thank the town of Templeton for sitting down with us a couple of days ago and really kind of working through a few of those hoops, really, and fleshing out a few things.
Right, that is wonderful, and I thank them as well, and as on behalf of the committee. That's good that we've had those discussions. Anyone else in the committee have a question, Mrs. Kojal?
No.
No, okay. And anyone else? No, I don't see any questions as of yet. Did you want to move on to your next topic then?
Sure. So if do you have the calendar, Kate, to pull up? So what we've done is, again, given the what transpired about 10 days ago in terms of negotiation between the state, the Commissioner of Ed and TA and the various teacher unions about needing time to train our staff. And I want to make sure that I stop for a second because, again, over 200 questions or comments came in, and lots of folks were saying, well, a few folks had said that, well, geez, they've had all this time to train. Well, that's not true. One, we haven't been together, but two, we just, for example, educational learning platform that the state is looking to assist, districts with, et cetera, and, a whole host of things. That there are things that we need to train up on because we've not had the opportunity to do that. So I think the 10 days, quite frankly, in terms of training is warranted, needed, and I'm thankful actually we have the time. So you see the calendar before you, and we've really stripped down some things. It's usually a lot busier, as you can, if you remember. But what I want to point out is that a couple of the bigger dates, quite frankly, is that if you see, if you look up in August, you'll see that the 27th, 28th, 31st, September 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10, 11 are all teacher PD days. Okay, so they will be on, in station. We'll of course be training on the things that we need to do, like PPE. There's a lot of stuff that actually has to be done. And the first day of school, pardon me, is the 14th of September. Now, normally what you see are a bunch of half-day training days, right? Well, of course, if we've got 10 days up front, we're not. How do you do a half day when, if you're remote? It didn't make any sense. So what we did is we took those off the table. Now the question becomes, well, what happens if the vaccine miracle cure happens and we kind of go back to normal? Well, then we'll talk about that. But right now, what we did is that there's the 10 days. And those are the 10 days that was negotiated between, again, the commissioner and the various teacher unions. We Narragansett have 2 days built into into the contract for training. And so the conversation became, well, we could do 12 days, right, prior, or do we want to maybe position them somewhere roughly in the middle of the year, and, to maybe have to retrain if we're coming, in or out of one of the various plans. And so what we did is we took those, in essence, 2 days, because part of the negotiation of that, by the way, the commissioner and the various unions, was that the 10 days had to be before the start of school. That was, you couldn't, chunk them and move them all around. So the 2 days that we have in our, in the contract with the NDEA, we moved to January 4th and 5th. So Christmas break happens, and, the 4th and 5th would be normally, you'd come, the kids would come back to school. We put the PD days there for no better reason other than it made sense that if we had to go into something, come out of something, or just to regroup coming out of the break, that this was a perfect time to do that. And so we have those down as PD days. We of course kept in, I'm trying to find, of course, all the holidays, etc. People have asked about teacher-parent conferences. Well, we got to see what that looks like. We have to see where we're at. We have to see what plan we're in. We have to see, and we certainly know that we have some time. We have the time available if we have to do that. With Wednesdays or something to that effect. We'd have to talk more about it, but we know that there's opportunity there. But ultimately, the last day of school, and this, because what we did with those 2 PD days, this will be different for the parents who, the community members who listened on Tuesday, is that the last day of school would be the 15th. Previously, I had said the 11th because I would have moved. At first, we had those 2 days kind of in our minds slotted prior to opening, before school opening. But by putting them in January, it simply moves the last day of school 2 more weekdays ahead of the 11th, which of course is a Tuesday. I joked, but I don't really joke about it, that Commissioner was asked point blank about snow days, and there won't be any quote unquote snow days. They'll just be, well, we would have called them e-learning days back when, but now they'll just be remote learning days. We won't need to make up snow days or heat days or anything to that effect. So again, there it is.
It also keeps the November 3rd election day
Oh yeah,
as our third PD day.
sorry, I missed that. Sorry, thank you.
Any questions from the committee on this new proposed calendar? I just have to scroll, so I'm sorry. I don't see any. With seeing no questions, I would entertain a motion to accept the school calendar as presented for FY. Okay, 21. I have a motion from Mrs. Kojal. Do I have a second? And I have a second from, I think that was that Mr. Marks or Mr. Mason? Mr. Mason, sorry, I was not looking at the screen. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will do roll call. Mrs. Robichaud,
Yes.
Mrs. Kojal,
Yes.
Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
Aye.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, so that is unanimous. We have now adopted this new calendar for FY 2021 school year. And I'm assuming we'll get this posted up onto the district website as soon as we can technically make that happen. So thank you, and thank you for the thought that went into putting this together. I personally want to say that I think that moving those 2 PD days into January makes a lot of sense to be able to retool, recalibrate, and it seems to me there was a well thought out plan. And I just want to reiterate the fact that, as Dr. Kazimant said, if things change, we will go back and look at this, and if we need to modify, we will do so when that comes up and a new proposal is put forth. So thank you. So we now have a school calendar. All right. Anything else any questions? Our intent tonight was to potentially vote on this particular reopening plan if we felt that we were in a position to do so. Are there any other questions that the committee has or comments as to, are we prepared with the information that was presented to move forward with giving approval on this plan? Or do we feel there's more information that we need and we would want to come back and meet next week to give that approval once we receive further information? All right, hearing no comments, I would entertain a motion to accept this reopening plan as presented, to be submitted to the state as our August 10th submission, or whatever the new due date would be. I just want to note too that we would be looking for to receive a copy of letter B, which was just that letter to the community. And I think that your reasoning for holding off would make sense now that we can give you direction to go. I would entertain a motion as such.
So moved.
I have a motion by, I believe, Mr. Marks. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mrs. Mattson. Questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, we will do a roll call vote on approving this reopening plan as presented for our August 10th submission. Mrs. Robichaud,
Yes.
Mrs. Kojal,
Yes.
Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes. So we have successfully adopted our reopening plan, which would be the hybrid A plan as presented. The documentation will be put together and submitted to the state as such, with the letter to the community being crafted by Dr. Casavant. And I know that you've also said that we will be sure to put everything out on our website so that the community will have available to it all of the pieces of information it would need.
And thank you. And first off, I want to, Eric, and I think Lisa's still there somewhere too as well. Again, we still have conversations with the NDEA. We talked about this on Tuesday. We've had a lot of conversations already. There's still some things to work out, but those are important conversations, and we're going to have them. And so I want to make sure I acknowledge that because I think that's important. It's the partners in this, and of course the UFCW. The other part I want to make sure that, and we're going to be putting this out again, just like we did the parent forums, is that, and I wish Vicky was here because we have to put out another survey. But this is a really, really important survey, and I'll tell you why. The survey that's going to go out is going to ask the parents to declare one way or another about either being part of the cohort model that was just voted, okay, or to be fully remote. This, again, is essential in the work that we do. I've been asked some really great questions, like what happens if you never ever get something from somebody, right? So you've asked, you've called, you've asked, you've called. I have to say that given the constraints that we have, and I say constraints, but given the guidance that we have from the state, we'll have just to assume that they're going to be, that they'll have to go to distance learning. Because if again, to the point of, I believe it was Ms. Smith, about we do have, given the 3-foot rule, etc., we only have so much room. And we're going to give people plenty of notice. We're going to put this out a lot of different times, just like did before, but this is not a survey to really just, space. And by the way, it's not going to be first come, first serve, if you get there first, that kind of thing. But it's really important that we understand that, yes, we know that we've asked this question 3 times. But I want to say that the first 2 times, we had to figure out how to create the plan that we were going to put before the community. we had to see, again, community choice was important. We needed their feedback. The questions were a big part of what we did. But this, when I say this is for real this time, I mean it. It's for real this time. We need to really know what you're thinking about, we answered all the questions like, well, what happens if I have a kindergartner that I want to, have go the cohort model, but I have a 11th grader who, that doesn't have to be family specific. You don't have, just because and I get to use the Smiths because Mrs. Jen says I can. If the Smiths don't have to be educated the same way, in the same way, we understand that children have different, just different needs. So this is important, and we're going to be putting it out that way. So I want to make sure I say that to the committee and to those who are listening. And so really that's that. It's an important part of what we need to do, because it's really the only way we're going to know how we're going to then, when I say distribute, we have of course teachers who will also need to know some information as well. I'm sure maybe Eric can speak to that, or Lisa to that point as well, if they so choose, but that's it. That's important.
I want to add to that, if I may, that I can't support what Dr. Cassavant said enough. I mean, in order to provide the best remote learning for students, we need to match them up with educators in the district. So we need to know the number and grade levels of those students who are not going to participate in a hybrid model. In addition, probably in the same email, you'll get a survey about busing, because busing is a huge constraint for us right now. I think Dr. Cassavant showed a chart previously with, our busing capacity is somewhere between 25 and 33% of the norm. So we really need a commitment from families to know who is going to drive their children and who really needs a bus. And we'll be issuing bus passes. So those surveys will come together in an email, and families will fill them out. If you intend to drive your child and intend to send your child for our hybrid model, you don't really need to answer either of them. We really need to hear from the families that are going to request remote learning only and busing.
To that, the question, an excellent question that was asked on one of the sessions was, well, depending, do you think you're going to have to stagger times at say the elementary school? Well, I can only fit a third. I said this on an 83 passenger bus, which at the elementary level in the mornings are generally full, at least that, coming to school, as we know, on some of those routes, normally they can only hold, out of 83, they can only hold 27. So, that's another hill we have to climb. We have to figure out, exactly what does this all mean? So those busing reports are important. And if, again, especially at Templeton Center, in terms of the traffic, et cetera, we will have to make some decisions. So that's why this information sooner rather than later is of the utmost importance, so we can make some decisions and obviously bring it back to the committee to explain, and then of course put it out to the community.
Mrs. Parker.
I'm just curious, I don't know if anyone here would know this. As a teacher, I know that there have been some teachers and paras that have been running the summer school program at Templeton Elementary, and I was wondering how that's been going, and what they have to say about that.
I have to tell you, I speak with Matt almost every day. I only say this because he hasn't told me of any major concerns. I have to tell you, I don't know. I know that it started off fairly well. People were well received. I know that some PPE questions came up, and we're working. I need to get some clarity on that. But we're going to be working that out. So I don't know. I have not heard anything officially or unofficially. Usually I hear if there's any, obviously I will hear from many people if there are many of their major issues, but I haven't heard of anything as of yet. Matt said it was going well, at least as the beginning of this week. So
that's a good starting point, though, just to kind of get some feel as for things that they see working, and maybe that can help us iron out things too.
No, excellent. I think we've actually, again, I go back to the PPE issue about exactly what is needed. I think that was a great I don't call it a test run, but it is. We're new to this, quite frankly, and it'll help inform us as we move forward.
Okay, just for the record, I just want to note that Mrs. Trifilo had to leave the meeting at 6:29, so for the minutes. I also wanted to say that this plan that we've now approved, obviously, we've approved it as of what we know today. As things change, the plan may need to change. I think Dr. Casavant just alluded to that nicely. We will continue to monitor and adapt as necessary, and we look forward to whatever feedback, especially as you start getting those responses from the community as to how, who's coming, how many, what the cohort might look like based on family, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want the community to be aware that we will pivot and adjust as we need to, based upon new information as it becomes available. The second thing I just wanted to make a statement about is, as a school committee, one of our jobs is policy. So we will be looking at policy as it relates to anything that we may need to change or adapt based upon the situation we're in. I know we have a policy meeting coming up, and we'll bring those back to the committee to review and figure out exactly what we need to change, be it temporary or long-term. Mrs. Kojal, I see you're waving your hand. Yep.
Can we do the policy meeting in person and just social distance? I find it easier when we're working on those things to be together and have conversation.
I think we can. I will double check with Mrs. Varney about availability of space that'll accommodate all of us, and we can get back to you. Because I agree. I think for this meeting, we have a lot to hash out, and it may be easier that way. So.
Before we even begin, there are so many questions we have to talk about, like with masks and PPE and all of that stuff. So yeah, I think it would be good if we could do it in person.
Kate, you had.
Please.
Yeah, I might have, am I mute? No, I might have missed a beat, but I wanted to say that Mr. Holloway heard our question. He's watching our meeting, and he said to say that he's really proud of the staff and the students. They've been doing a great job in the summer program. There was a full staff training around health and safety issues, and the kids are doing really well with masks and distancing.
That's great feedback. So,
Madam Chair, also, I'd like to suggest, obviously, that if maybe we could start exploring about meeting in person during our school committee meetings. I think that that's important. We certainly, again, we're kind of in a routine, right? We're routinistic. It took us a while to figure out how to do this, and now we're, kind of comfortable doing it. But I think that, quite frankly, we should start, if nothing else, our teachers are going to be with students, right? And we know how to distance, and we know how to do that. And I think that that's an important part of moving forward. That, again, that's just my recommendation, but I think it's important for us to start looking into it. And we can certainly, we know about the space constraints, et cetera, but I think we start maybe looking into maybe getting back into, the swing of things, so to speak.
I agree, and I've actually had a couple of the members ask when we could actually get to that. And, obviously, if we're going to have our teachers and then ultimately our students on site, we should be able to figure out how to meet. So, and to add one more thing to your to-do list, perhaps we could explore how we could work with TCTV to provide the capability. I did just see another school committee, it was meeting in person, and they're not allowing the public in because there's just not enough space. So there's a way to post it so that we can do it appropriately. And obviously we seem to have a decent system right now for some public input. So we could still work with that. The only question I always have is if we have committee members who aren't comfortable yet coming in, so technically how do we do that so we can have a Zoom with the remote access for whoever can't come in with the rest of us in person, and that's all the technical side. So again, you could add one more thing to your to-do list. That would be awesome, because I think most of us would like to come in and meet in person if we can.
I want to thank Susan Varney in advance for all the hard work that she's going to do on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Varney.
My pleasure.
All right, are there any other questions or comments at this point? I do know,
I have one.
oh, go ahead, Mrs. Kojal, yep.
I just want to say thank you to everyone. I'm very excited about the plan. I think you put a lot of thought into it, and I think it's a really, really good plan. So thank you for all your hard work.
Ditto.
I've-
Yeah, if you could please extend that thank you out to your administrative team, and for them to also extend it out to the working groups that they've had together, all of the teachers and the teacher leaders. This plan was not created in a vacuum, and I can only imagine the amount of hours and blood, sweat, and tears, as they say, that have gone into this. So it's really appreciated. And I also want to thank the rest of the school committee too, because I know that, you know, I've had feedback from many people as this has gone by, with really insightful questions that the committee itself has had. So I think that we've really taken a good look at what we feel is the best approach as of what we know today. You know, I'll qualify with that. So we do need to schedule, and we will schedule, an administrative academic subcommittee meeting. So I'll try to coordinate that so that we can talk about maybe just some of the more specific questions on thoughts on how we might deliver things, that it would be best to have that in a subcommittee first, and then we can present. I did have one other thought that I would like to put maybe on Kate's to-do list at some point. Could we get a demo of those STAR assessments, maybe done live at one of these meetings? Maybe not next month, but at some point. I think it would be interesting for us as the committee and the community to see what these assessments are that the kids will now be taking, especially that we've rolled them out from K to 12.
Sure, I can work on that. I think there will be a limit on what I can show you with reports because of obvious reasons of student names and so forth, but I could give you examples, and I could certainly walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, you can pick one of us to test and take the assessment.
Sure.
Because that's really actually what I'm more curious about, is what are our students seeing? What does it look like, to get a feel for that? Because, you know, we're so far removed from being in school.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see that at some point. So thank you.
Sure. I'll look into that.
And then I only had one other thing that I thought might be something right up Dr. Casavant's alley. Is I know you said that up front, we're going to offer some training on PPE and how to wear a mask. Could we consider maybe making a couple of informative videos that we could ask the student body to view in advance? Maybe have them create some, I don't know, something that might be a little fun that would get the message across, and then we could reinforce when they come back.
Sure.
Just, you know, just to make things
Good
fun.
idea.
You know? Yeah,
We know a few people, so we'll see what we can do.
I'm sure. All right. Any other questions or comments from the school committee? I don't see any, and I believe that superintendent has given us all the information that he has to share today. We don't have any other items that came on within 48 hours, so there's nothing there. There's no new correspondence as of today. And our next meeting was initially going to be on Monday, and we had planned that just in case we didn't approve the plan this evening. Since we have approved the plan, and that was really the only item on the agenda, I will make the notice that we will cancel the meeting on Monday. So our next meeting would be our regularly scheduled meeting for Wednesday, August 19th. And we'll plan 5 o'clock via Zoom at this point. And if there's any change to how the meeting will be delivered, we will let everybody know, obviously. And then the last thing on the agenda was an executive session. It was there as a placeholder. We will not do executive session tonight. So that means I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion from Mrs. Kojal. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Mrs. Robichaud. We'll do roll call. Mrs. Robichaud.
Yes.
Mrs. Kojal.
Yes.
Mrs. Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Marks.
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
Aye.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes. So I thank everyone for coming tonight. Again, a thank you to Dr. Casavant and his entire team for getting this reopening plan together. And until we meet again, good night, everyone. Thank you.
Night.
Night.